The pasta was still steaming when she slammed her fork down. Unbelievable, she hissed, loud enough to silence the clinking of her wine glass. You forgot. Again. I didn't look up. I couldn't. Not yet. I'd rehearsed this in my head 100 times, but now that it was here, this exact moment, I still felt like a crumpled napkin waiting to be tossed. She kept going. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to sit through an entire anniversary dinner while my husband stares at the lasagna like it's a crossword puzzle? I reached into my coat pocket slowly. It was hanging over the chair behind me, not dramatic, just casual enough that she hadn't noticed the envelope stuffed inside earlier. The edges were soft from weeks of handling, folding, and unfolding. Janessa, I said, my voice shaking slightly, before you yell anymore, just read this. She blinked, laughed bitterly. Are you seriously trying to make me feel guilty? On our anniversary? I didn't answer. Just slid the envelope across the table between the garlic bread and her untouched salad. She stared at it like it was poison. Then, with a grunt, ripped the flap open and pulled out the printed emails, the screenshots, the rideshare receipts, the photo from outside the Hilton where she wasn't supposed to be. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she'd screened. She didn't even finish reading before she tossed the papers onto the table like they'd burned her fingertips. I can explain, she muttered. But I wasn't interested in explanations. Not anymore. Not after last month, when she left me standing alone in the rain on my birthday while she lost track of time. Not after the night I cried in the laundry room just so she wouldn't hear me again. You forgot my birthday, I said. Not once. Not twice. You've made a habit of forgetting me. Tonight, I forgot one date, and suddenly I'm the villain. She looked up, her expression frozen between guilt and rage. And then, quietly, I added, You can scream if you want, Janessa. But this time, you're not the only one who gets to ruin dinner. She didn't speak again that night. She didn't eat a single bite after that. Just sat there, staring at the folded evidence like it was a trick, like maybe if she blinked hard enough, the receipts would vanish and I'd turn back into the same clueless husband she'd been lying to for months. Maybe years. But I was done being clueless. I'd spent too long trying to be small so she could shine. Now I was just tired of shrinking. The waiter came by and awkwardly asked if everything was okay. She nodded quickly and said, Fine, through clenched teeth. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. We both knew we had already crossed a line there was no returning from. When we got home, she didn't speak to me for almost an hour. Just paced around the living room, occasionally checking her phone and turning it face down like it might betray her again. I sat on the edge of the couch, holding the same folder I'd brought to dinner, tapping it gently with my fingers. I hadn't even shown her everything. See, I didn't just find out about the Hilton. That was the tip of it. What opened the door was the calendar notification she forgot to delete. Lunch with G, 12:30 at Trenton Park Bistro. I thought it was work at first, but when I checked her messages the day her phone buzzed and she was in the shower, it wasn't work. It wasn't even close. She called him G. A single letter. No name, just an initial. Like that made it cleaner. Simpler. Safer. But the words around it weren't safe. They were sharp, intimate, soaked in subtext. Can't wait to feel your hands again. He's out late tonight. We'll take separate cars, just in case. My hands shook reading those at first. I remember that. I nearly dropped her phone. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was realizing how casually it was done. Like I was a roommate, a forgotten side character in her personal drama. Like I didn't even matter enough to hide things properly. She finally broke the silence by asking, What do you want me to say? I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was so familiar. That line. That exhausted tone. Like I was overreacting. Like this was just a minor inconvenience in her carefully scheduled life. So I asked her, Do you even remember the last time you celebrated my birthday? She opened her mouth but said nothing. Her brows creased. She was thinking, actually thinking, like the answer might come if she stalled long enough. But it didn't come. Because it never happened. You forgot it last year. And the year before that. And the one before that. You know what I did those nights, Janessa? I baked a cake by myself. From a box. Lit the candle alone. Didn't even eat it. Just stared at it until the wax melted onto the frosting. She looked down. I kept going. I never brought it up. Not once. Because I figured, maybe you're just busy. Maybe it's not your thing. I didn't want to be needy. I didn't want to be that guy. But then I missed a single date. The first time in 15 years. And you yell like I ran over your cat. There was no apology. No tearful confession. Just silence. Then she picked up the papers again and asked, "Are you leaving me?" I didn't expect that. Not that quickly. So I told her the truth. I haven't decided. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. You don't have to pretend anymore. She nodded slowly, almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for the mask to fall. Then she went upstairs, heels echoing against the hardwood like punctuation marks. The bedroom door closed. I didn't follow her. Instead, I sat in the dim light of the hallway, folder still in my hands, and for the first time in years, I stopped blaming myself. Because finally, I knew I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the distance, the coldness, the condescension. It had a name, and it wasn't me. And the part that truly broke me, that was still yet to come. I woke up on the couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. My back ached from the way I'd curled into myself overnight, like I was trying to disappear into the cushions. The house was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like the eerie silence after a storm. You know something's shifted, but you don't know how much damage has been done until you start checking the walls. Upstairs, the bedroom door was closed. I didn't hear her. Not the usual rustling of makeup bags or the low hum of her straightener. For a second, I let myself believe she had left already. That maybe she'd packed a bag and gone to wherever G lived, if he even had a real address in her life. But then I noticed her heels by the door and her coat still hanging. She was here, just hiding. I didn't go up there. I couldn't. I didn't want to see whatever face she was going to put on. The fake calm, the guilt-coated charm, the "we can talk later" routine. I'd lived in her versions of reality for too long. Versions where she forgot birthdays but called it accidental, where she worked late but came home with perfume that wasn't hers. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and reopened the folder. It felt absurd, really, going through it again like I hadn't memorized every word. But I needed to remind myself it was real, that I wasn't overthinking, that the hurt I felt had shape and structure, that it existed. There was a printed message in there from 3 months ago. The subject line read, "When are we running away?" It wasn't a joke. Not from the way she wrote about me, about how I was passive, how I never fought back, how she couldn't believe someone could be so content living such a dull little life. That part made me stop. My dull little life. I had poured everything into this house, into our stability. I fixed leaky faucets, worked overtime shifts in muddy basements, canceled every guy's night for a decade just so she'd never feel neglected. I had been predictable because I thought that was love, that showing up, quietly, consistently, was enough. Apparently, to her, it wasn't just not enough, it was embarrassing. Around noon, she finally came downstairs. No makeup, hoodie, and leggings. She looked younger like that, almost like the version of her I met back when we were broke and eating frozen burritos on the floor of our first apartment. But I knew better than to confuse appearances with sincerity. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded, but I didn't offer her a seat. She stayed standing and didn't meet my eyes. I never meant for it to go this far. I stayed silent. It started as venting, just texting someone who actually listened. "You stopped talking to me a long time ago, Eldon. We stopped talking to each other." Now that made me laugh, not loud, but one of those sad, single-syllable laughs you do when someone lies so gently it almost sounds noble. "I didn't stop talking. You just stopped hearing." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she asked the question I think had been rotting in her brain since last night. "What happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? I told her I needed time, that I wasn't going to make some impulsive decision just to prove I had a spine. But I also wasn't going to pretend things were normal. Not anymore. And then, before she could say something to twist it all into some mutual failing, I told her I had one more thing. She frowned. "More?" I walked into the hallway and returned with a small black box. Not jewelry. Not a ring. Inside was the flash drive. She didn't recognize it at first. But when I plugged it into the laptop and opened the folder labeled Trenton Security, her face drained. I hadn't planned to dig that deep. But after finding the emails, I started asking questions. I contacted the manager at Trenton Park Bistro, where she'd been meeting G, and explained I was investigating an affair involving potential workplace misconduct. He bought it. Gave me a copy of the outdoor camera footage without much resistance. There she was, week after week. Same guy, same car, same smiles. I didn't say anything. I just let it play. The footage was silent, but her reaction wasn't. "Jesus, Eldon, why would you go that far?" I looked at her, truly looked at her and said, "Because you went further." She didn't deny it anymore. And I didn't feel victorious. I just felt hollow. She sat there like a statue, shoulders locked, eyes unblinking. The footage kept looping, silent scenes of her meeting that man in the same parking spot every Thursday. Sometimes she wore sunglasses. Sometimes she dressed like she was going to a cocktail party instead of a client meeting. But it was always him. Same car. Same smile. Same kiss at the end of their lunches. I watched her watching herself. I didn't interrupt. I didn't need to. Every pixel on the screen screamed louder than I ever could. Finally, she said it. Quietly. Almost like it wasn't meant for me. "I didn't think you'd ever actually find out." That sentence sat in the air like smoke. I didn't know what stung more, the betrayal itself or the quiet assumption that I was too small, too passive, too ordinary to ever uncover it. I leaned back and crossed my arms. I wanted her to squirm. I wanted her to feel half of what I'd swallowed for years. But oddly, in that moment, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like a man who had dug up a truth so ugly it made everything else around it rot. "You know what the worst part is?" I asked, my voice dry and even. "It's not even him. Not really. It's not that you cheated. It's that somewhere along the way, you decided I didn't matter enough to protect from it. I wasn't worth hiding it from properly. You let it leak through the cracks like I wouldn't notice." She blinked fast, jaw trembling, but no tears came. Janessa never cried, not even at funerals. Not even when her sister got diagnosed last fall. She said emotions were a liability. I stood up and walked to the sink. I didn't want to look at her anymore. I ran water over my hands like it could somehow wash off the filth of what I now knew. I stared at the drain. I'd spent a decade unclogging our life while she clogged it with lies. "I guess I thought," she said behind me, "that if I kept it quiet enough, you'd never ask questions." I turned slowly. "You didn't just keep it quiet, Janessa. You performed. You called me boring and ungrateful. You acted like I was the reason this marriage felt cold. You made me feel like I was the problem." Her voice cracked for the first time. "I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't care enough not to." She flinched. For the first time, something human flickered across her face, not regret exactly, but recognition. She couldn't deny it anymore. And then she said something that made the floor beneath me feel like it shifted. "I was going to leave you. That was the plan. After the holidays." I froze. She kept going, like confession was suddenly easier now that the lid had been blown off. G wanted me to move in. We were going to take a trip first, to see how it felt. I already had the deposit down on a rental. It's in his name, but I held up a hand. "Stop." I didn't want details. I didn't want to hear about the itinerary she never offered me, the rental she was willing to share with someone who didn't even know I existed. She lowered her eyes. "I was going to tell you, Eldon. I really was." I nodded slowly. "Sure. After the decorations came down. After the family photos. After you smiled in front of my mother and handed me a gift you bought from a clearance rack out of guilt." Her mouth parted like she wanted to protest. But she didn't. Because I was right. The silence grew thick again. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the tick of the cheap clock above the doorway, the quiet ache in my chest that hadn't stopped since last night. I looked at her one last time, really looked, and finally asked the question that had haunted me since I printed the first screenshot. "Was there ever a version of this where you stayed? Where you chose me?" She hesitated. And that was my answer. I left the kitchen. And for the first time in 15 years, I locked the door behind me, not to keep her out, but to keep myself in. To stop myself from walking back into a life that had already started packing its bags. The door clicked shut behind me with a weight I hadn't felt before. Not just physical, it was like something shifted in the air the moment I turned the lock. I stood there in the hallway for a while, not knowing what to do next. Not crying. Not yelling. Just standing. Like if I moved too soon, everything I just heard would suddenly evaporate and I'd be left wondering if it all actually happened. I didn't go far. I walked into the guest room, the one we always used for folded laundry and half-finished projects. I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch we never opened. And for the first time since our wedding day, I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the nightstand. It left a faint circle on my skin. I stared at that pale ring-shaped dent like it had something important to say. That afternoon, she didn't try to talk to me. Not once. I heard her walking upstairs, opening drawers, moving hangers. She was packing, not running away, not slamming doors. Just calm, methodical packing. As if this ending had been rehearsed long before I caught up to the script. Around 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. It startled both of us. I could hear her freeze upstairs. I waited. The chime echoed again. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door, unsure if I should expect a package or a person. It was a person. Middle-aged, tall, wearing a gray collared shirt with the logo of a water filter company. He held a clipboard and looked completely out of place on our porch. I opened the door, and before I could say anything, he said, "Hi, is Janessa home?" My heart dropped. I didn't respond, just stared at him. He shifted uncomfortably. She said she lived here. Sorry, I'm not trying to be weird. I'm just here to pick up. I closed the door. Firmly, not violently, but clearly. I stood behind it, hand on the knob, my pulse hammering. I heard the footsteps fade. A car door shut. The engine started. Upstairs, her voice rang out. Was that him? I didn't answer, because she already knew. A minute later, she came halfway down the stairs, holding a gym bag like she was heading to a weekend yoga retreat. He wasn't supposed to come here. I told him not to. You gave him our address. She shrugged, like that somehow made sense. We were planning, Eldon. It wasn't meant to overlap like this. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Planning. That's what you call it. You locked the kitchen door. Eldon, you've already made your choice. That made me look up at her. Really look. She wasn't remorseful. She wasn't even defensive. She was tired. Tired of pretending she didn't want out. Tired of hiding the cracks in something she stopped maintaining years ago. I took a deep breath and said, "You know what's funny? You thought I forgot the anniversary because I didn't care. But the truth is, I remembered. I remembered 3 days before, when I saw the necklace ad you kept pointing out on my browser. I ordered it. Overnight delivery." She blinked. It arrived the same day I found those emails. I never even opened the box. She opened her mouth, but I kept going. I didn't forget our anniversary, Janessa. I just stopped pretending it mattered. Her face hardened. So what do you want now? Revenge? You want to post this somewhere? Send the screenshots to your friends? Humiliate me? No, I said quietly. I just want my peace back. She nodded slowly, no longer surprised. I'll stay at Lana's tonight, she muttered. You can have space. Space. That's what they always call it. Like it's breathable. Like it's enough. She left less than an hour later. No tears. No shouting. Just silence and a slammed trunk. I didn't go to the window. I didn't care to see if he was the one picking her up. That night, I walked into the kitchen, found the little white box in the back of the drawer, the necklace, still wrapped, still unopened. I held it for a long time. And then, with the same care I once put into planning our anniversaries, I walked to the trash can and dropped it in. That was the first night I slept through without waking up at 3 a.m., wondering why she felt so far away beside me. Because this time, she was gone for real. The morning after she left felt hollow. Like a house with the furniture still in place, but the warmth sucked out of it. Her coat was gone, her toothbrush too, but everything else, the framed wedding photo in the hallway, the potted ivy she never remembered to water, stayed behind, mocking me with their fake stability. I brewed coffee for one and didn't bother with breakfast. What was the point? I just sat by the window, letting the mug go cold in my hands, staring at a neighborhood that didn't know anything had changed. And that's when I remembered the drawer. We had this little drawer in the living room end table. The kind of drawer you forget exists until you're desperate or bored or both. Inside were old receipts, expired coupons, a couple of batteries that may or may not still work. But wedged behind a stack of unmailed holiday cards was something I'd forgotten, a greeting card. It was unopened. My name was on the envelope in her handwriting. Sloppy, rushed, no stamp, just sealed and hidden. I don't know what I expected. Maybe something sentimental, maybe something she wrote before everything fell apart. But when I opened it, my stomach twisted. Inside the card was a note. Short, only 4 words. I'll tell him soon. No date, no context. But that wasn't what haunted me. It was what was tucked inside the card. A small printout, a travel itinerary for 2. Round-trip flights. Out of state. Departing 2 weeks from now. Her name and his. Gee, the initials matched the ones in the emails. And in the notes section of the booking, no checked baggage. Keep it simple. I stared at that line like it was written in flames. No checked baggage. Just enough room for what she needed. Nothing that might slow her down. And she had this printed. Not just saved digitally, actually printed. Which meant, at some point, she sat here in our house, alone, and thought, I should put this somewhere safe. And she chose that drawer. Maybe she wanted me to find it eventually. Maybe not. But the fact that she had this kind of escape planned, and still screamed at me over a forgotten anniversary like I was the one breaking the marriage. It flipped something in me. I stood up and started walking around the house, room by room, not cleaning but observing. There were signs everywhere. The perfume on the guest pillow, the drawer in the bathroom that suddenly had more free space than usual, the untouched bottle of my cologne, the one I used to wear when we still went on dates. She had stopped noticing me long before I stopped noticing her. By noon, I'd opened every drawer, every cabinet. Not because I was searching, but because I needed to see the truth laid bare. And then I found something I wasn't ready for. An old phone. Her previous one. The one she replaced 2 months ago when she accidentally dropped it in the sink. It still turned on. No SIM card, but the internal storage hadn't been wiped. And in one of the folders buried under her gallery, among screenshots of memes, makeup tutorials, and grocery lists, were videos. 6 of them. I don't want to describe what I saw in full. I can't. But it was her and him. In a hotel room. In our city. 3 weeks ago. They laughed. Kissed. At one point, she picked up the phone and whispered, "You don't get this at home, do you?" The man didn't answer. Just smiled. I shut off the phone, walked to the backyard, and buried it. Literally. Behind the old maple tree where we once talked about building a swing for the kids we never had. I stood there, my hands dirty, my chest tight, and realized something that hit me harder than anything else so far. She never planned on telling me. Not soon. Not later. Not at all. That card? That note? It was insurance. Something to dangle just in case she got caught. A tiny window she could point to and say, "See? I was going to be honest." But she wasn't. She just didn't think I'd go looking. And now that I had, there was no going back to who I used to be. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a minute. I lay on the couch staring up at the ceiling, trying to track the movement of headlights across the living room wall as cars passed outside. But the only thing I could see was her face, not the real one, not the one I married, but the version of her captured on that old phone screen. The smirk. The softness in her voice when she spoke to him. The part of her that used to belong to me, now repurposed like it never mattered. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove 2 hours to visit my brother Trent. We don't talk much. He's the opposite of me, divorced twice, loud, opinionated, rarely serious. But I needed to say things out loud, things that had been sitting in my throat like stones, and I couldn't say them in that house anymore. Not with the ghost of our marriage still walking around in Janessa's perfume. He met me in the driveway. No questions. Just a look, then a nod. We sat on his porch drinking gas station coffee while the wind wrestled with the lawn chairs. I told him everything. From the forgotten birthdays to the hidden drawer, the hotel videos, even the man on our doorstep. He didn't laugh. He didn't call me pathetic. He just listened. And when I finished, he said something that I didn't expect. "You know," he said slowly, "for a guy who was always worried about doing things the right way, you got played harder than both my divorces combined." I didn't know if I should feel insulted or understood. Maybe both. He leaned forward. "You kept that house clean. You paid every bill. You remembered her preferences, her allergies, her mother's birthday. You never once embarrassed her. And she still chose that guy. Do you know why?" I shook my head. Because people like her, they don't want someone who's always there. They want someone who makes them feel special, even if it's fake. Even if it's temporary. You gave her roots, and she wanted fireworks. I didn't say anything. Just let that settle into the silence. He continued. "She didn't cheat because you were boring. She cheated because she was. And she needed someone else to blame." I left his house with a strange kind of calm. Not peace, not yet. But clarity. For the first time, I wasn't spinning around in the chaos she created. I was watching it from the outside, understanding it for what it really was. Her escape had nothing to do with me. Back at the house, I found a note taped to the fridge. It wasn't an apology. Just a list of things she was coming back for. Sweaters, toiletries, photo albums, spare charger, espresso maker. Like it was an Airbnb checkout. I didn't touch it. But I did go upstairs, to the bedroom we used to share. I opened her closet, took out the suitcase she'd forgotten, and packed everything she mentioned. And then I added one thing she hadn't listed, the white box with the necklace I never gave her. No note. No message. Just that. I put the suitcase by the door. Later that night, I heard the key in the lock. She stepped in like a stranger, already halfway through a phone call. "Yeah, just grabbing my stuff. I'll text you when I leave," she said into the phone, not even lowering her voice. Not even glancing in my direction. She didn't see me standing in the kitchen, but I saw everything I needed to see. She hung up quickly when she noticed me and froze, mid-step, like she was waiting for me to start yelling. But I didn't. I just pointed to the suitcase. She walked over, lifted it, zipped her coat, and turned without saying a word. At the door, I spoke one last time. Janessa. She paused. Someday, you'll remember this moment. Not the lies, not the trip, not even the guy. Just this moment, when you walked away from someone who would have done anything for you, just because you thought he was easy to replace. She didn't turn around, but I heard the breath catch in her throat. And then the door shut for the final time. I didn't chase her. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at the empty hallway, thinking maybe forgetting that anniversary was the best thing I ever did. The house stayed quiet after she left, not silent like something missing, but quiet like something had finally settled. I walked through each room, switching off lights, closing drawers, straightening frames, not out of habit but to reclaim it. It was my space now. The ghost of what she'd been to me was gone. The first few days were strange. I expected to feel shattered. I expected the urge to call her or rehash everything in my head 1,000 different ways. But instead, what I felt was relief. Not just that she was gone, but that I had finally stopped chasing someone who was never running toward me to begin with. I took time off work. Not a dramatic leave, just enough to breathe. I told my boss I needed a break, and to my surprise, he offered me a client project out of state 2 weeks, up in Oregon, rustic property inspection for a mountain lodge restoration. I took it. Packed a bag. No forwarding address. No long goodbyes. It rained almost every day I was there. The kind of steady rain that made the trees look cleaner, the air sharper. I'd spend mornings hiking to the sites, clipboard in one hand, thermos in the other. Evenings were quiet. Reading. Sleeping. Listening to the wind. And then, halfway through the second week, I met someone. Not romantically, not yet. But she was kind. Her name was Marla. She was managing the lodge project. Smart and a little clumsy, always laughing at her own mistakes. One day, she slipped on wet stone and nearly dropped an armful of blueprints. I caught them. We both laughed. Over coffee later, I told her, this is the first time in over a decade someone's laughed with me instead of at me. She didn't ask for details. Just said, then I hope it's the first of many. When I got back home, I started making changes. Little things at first. Got rid of the wine glasses we never used. Painted the guest room. Swapped out the anniversary photo for a picture I took of the Oregon hillside, fog crawling between the trees like a second sky. And one night, I baked myself a birthday cake. I lit a single candle. No guests, no singing. Just me and that flickering little flame. But this time, I made a wish. Not for her to come back. Not for the past to change. Just for the strength to keep choosing myself, even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when it would be easier to fall back into old patterns. And I blew out the candle. That was the first night in years I didn't feel forgotten, because I had finally remembered who I was without her. And somehow, that was enough.